How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to In the Pit with Steve. I am the captain of the Mosh Pit Carnival, and we are here with another concert review because I've been able to get some tickets to some interesting shows this year, and I figure for some of the bigger ones, I'd share my experience. Previously, if you'd like to see what else I've seen, it'll be 2 weeks ago at this point, I went to Philadelphia to see Justice on the Hyperdrama tour. This time around, I was just across from Philadelphia, just across that Ben Franklin Bridge over in lovely Camden, New Jersey at the Freedom Mortgage Pavilion to see Slipknot on the Here Comes the Pain tour, which is also the 25th anniversary of their self-titled album. Some call it the debut. It is the major label debut. They did have Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat before, so I guess it depends on how you look at it, but for all intents and purposes, essentially their debut album. And they were doing something special this time around. They stripped down the live show, made it look a little bit more like a Slipknot performance would have looked back in 1999, though they did still retain some elements from their current live shows, specifically the riser underneath where Sid, the sampler, and new drummer Eli Casagrande are. That has kind of the fan blades spinning with the Slipknot logo on them. The past 2 times I have seen the band live, they have had that, so I imagine it's going to be a fairly permanent fixture going forward. At the angle I was sitting, I could not tell if Sid was on his treadmill. I don't think he was because I didn't see the matching treadmill on the other side. I had a very awkward angle. We'll get into all that, but it was a tour that I really didn't want to miss, but it wasn't really coming anywhere near me. Philadelphia, New Jersey is a several-hour drive. When you factor in traffic, all in all, it was a little bit less than 6 hours to get to my hotel. I stayed about 10 minutes away from where the venue was and just Ubered over there and Ubered back. And so it's a tough sell, especially after going to Philadelphia the week prior to see Justice. And I'm also, as I'm recording this, I'm going to Boston this weekend for an event. So it was just a little bit tough to try and figure it out. But when Live Nation did their $25 ticket sale, I was actually very surprised to see that the Slipknot tour was a part of that. They didn't have very many seats left when I got it, so I did get one, but I was in the second to last row, all the way to the right up against the wall. So I definitely had a kind of diagonal view of the stage. I will say I Googled it quickly. I don't know if this is an accurate number or not, though. I would not be surprised. It said that the max capacity for the Freedom Mortgage Pavilion was 25,000 people. The show was not labeled a sellout, but man, I don't know how they would have fit more people, at least on the lawn. There were some empty seats, just scattered kind of throughout. I imagine probably some scalpers, resellers, bought the tickets and couldn't sell them. But I mean, the lawn looked like they were packed in like sardines. Like it looked like a very unpleasant experience. I was very thankful that I didn't have to use the restroom or anything while I was there because I can only imagine what those lines were like. I ducked out. Oops, sorry, alarm going off my phone. I ducked out very briefly. I'm also not the type of person that eats at a show. I typically just get dinner beforehand or I eat afterwards. But it was very warm and humid, so I did venture off to get something to drink, and I just went to the first booth that had water and just got a water. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait in line very long, but I did see that the merch lines were ridiculously long, and I assume it was the beer lines. I'm not sure. I don't drink, so I don't ever really pay attention to that. But I'm assuming the other next longest line was probably line to get beer or food of some sort. But overall, the venue itself, let's talk about the venue itself. We have something very similar where I live. Not as many people. Our holds about 17,500, I believe, but it's an amphitheater on the water, just like that. Well, I think ours is a little bit more on the water than theirs is. With ours here, you can actually drive your boat up to it and listen to the show. A little bit more enclosed than a typical amphitheater. Ours is open on both sides. The water's on the left side, and then just kind of merch and bathrooms and food and drinks and all that are on the right. This had a very large indoor concourse, and then a very large outdoor area. The outdoor area specifically, if you live in the Northeast and are familiar with the venue, it reminded me a lot of Montage Mountain in Pennsylvania, where it kind of has its own little village and almost looks like a state fair or something, where there's all these different places to eat and get drinks and whatnot. And then, you know, rows of like porta potties and stuff. I assume that they had indoor bathrooms as well in that giant concourse building. I just didn't see them. My seat was very comfortable. I had a seat. I was in, underneath the roof of the pavilion. Very comfortable seat. No complaints there whatsoever. My biggest complaint though is something to do with the venue. And I don't know if this is just where I was sitting and the fact that I was so far back and up against a wall or not. Maybe it was a weird sound bouncing sort of thing. But this was one of the quietest concerts I have ever been to. And for three very heavy bands, you would expect a much louder experience. I've seen Slipknot several times. And they've always, they're a loud band. They're a heavy metal band, It's just, it was a little strange. It was very odd being at such a high level professional show at a very nice venue and it being hard to hear the bands. I started looking up into the ceiling. They obviously had the rows of speakers hanging down by the stage. On the back end of where the roof ended, they had speakers pointing outwards for the lawn crowd, but nothing in between. No speakers midway over the crowd. So it made it very, very difficult to hear the band at sometimes. Slipknot, because they just have so much going on, so many, audio inputs being pushed out for each member of the band, that there were definitely moments where it sounded a little muddled. The mix was not great. Overall, fine though. But you could definitely tell that maybe they were having a hard time dealing with it. Or like I said, maybe it was an acoustic anomaly. It was just where I was sitting, the way the sound was bouncing that night, the way that sound travels in that particular venue. Maybe that's the case. I thought the two openers, while very low in volume, very clear, easy to understand. I could hear everything the singers were saying in between songs, stuff like that, but definitely just kind of an odd experience. But certainly didn't take away from the overall enjoyment of the show. So why don't we just dive right into that? So joining Slipknot on this 25th anniversary tour were Orbit Culture from Sweden, I believe, and Knocked Loose, one of the hottest bands in the world right now. Certainly playing the biggest crowds I believe they have probably played on a regular basis. I mean, I think either the night after or the night I'm recording this, I think they're at Madison Square Garden. Playing really big crowds. But let's start with Orbit Culture. So Orbit Culture is a band. I've heard their name for a while. Never really took a chance to listen to them until just a few months ago. Around the same time I started this channel, I thought about reacting to one of their songs just because I kept hearing the name. I ended up listening to it on my own time, and then I just couldn't stop. I listened to pretty much everything that they have on Spotify. I listened to them for about 2 hours straight on the drive down to the show. Really, really like them. Big particular fan of the song While We Serve, and they did play that live. I thought they had a super tight set. I believe they played 7 or 8 songs, but they didn't treat them like an opening band. Like they still had all of their kind of stage decorations and stuff. It wasn't just kind of them on stage, playing for 20, 30 minutes, whatever, and then, ushered off. Like it felt like I was at an Orbit Culture show. Like it felt like a legit show. And with them only having 3 bands, it's probably easier for them to kind of do this, especially because Slipknot didn't play a super long set. But yeah, I mean, they absolutely ripped through everything. And the other thing that was really nice was, I think just because the venue had been really communicating like how busy the show was going to be, it's not like people were still filling in when Orbit Culture started. Like, I would say it was probably at like 80% capacity at that point. Like, I mean, it was filled up. They were definitely not playing to a small crowd like an opener's crowd typically would be while people are still trying to park and get in and find their seat and all that stuff. Like they were there. I can't necessarily say from the reactions how much of the crowd actually knew who they were, how big of fans they were. But they were definitely participating in the crowd participation stuff, clapping along, chanting along, the whole thing. They definitely were won over by the end. They got a huge reaction. I thought Orbit Culture put on a hell of a show. I would love to see them if they come anywhere near me and they were doing like a headlining show so I could see more of them. I would really like to do that. Something else I also want to pick out, and this is just a personal thing, as an old broken down, semi-retired drummer who has severe back issues and can't stand up straight anymore, sit up straight. Their drummer has impeccable posture. It was like the first thing I noticed when I watched him play. Like he was sitting just straight up, like you could measure to him. and he looked super comfortable playing. So I was definitely a little jealous. I actually texted somebody. I was like, man, this guy's got excellent posture. Just makes me feel worse about myself. But yeah, I mean, the band was super tight, sounded great live. Singer's got a great voice. Yeah, put on one hell of a show. Just loved it. And then Knocked Loose came out, and they had what seemed to be their full setup. I've seen live footage of them since the new album came out. And aside from like a couple of decorations I didn't see, I mean, they had the big like light up cross, and they had all the lights, and they had their backdrop and all that stuff. I mean, it looked like we were at a Knocked Loose show, just like it looked like we were at an Orbit Culture show. They didn't come across as just yet another band on the package. I think the way I'm thinking about this was the last time I saw Slipknot, Code Orange had opened, and they were really just kind of on stage, and that was it. They didn't really have anything else going on, so they just kind of looked like, an opening band, which yes, they were. But I mean, they really made it feel like you're getting 3 full performances from these bands, which I really enjoyed. And now Knocked Loose played a long set. They played for almost an hour, I think. Played pretty much everything you would want to hear off the new album, played some older stuff too. The crowd was super into them. I mean, they were really into them, singing along. Like, you could tell that this was a crowd that knew who they were. And so to see them being able to play for such a large audience, and really see their popularity coming through, because Slipknot draws a more mainstream audience, because a lot of the fans of Slipknot who have grown up with the band, they're in their 40s now, they're in their 50s now, some of them. I'm in my late 30s. The first time I saw, well, we'll get into it. I mean, the first time I saw Slipknot wasn't quite 25 years ago, but it was 23 years ago, pretty damn close. And there's definitely some people there, they were with their kids and stuff. And there was a dad in front of me who I overheard him talking to his daughter, saying like, I was at Ozfest and stuff, and this is the kind of stuff I was listening to 25 years ago. And now he had his daughter there, and she knew every word to every Knocked Loose song. She was super into it. So you could see that they were kind of bringing that next generation along. And Knocked Loose set was absolutely fantastic. Tons of crowd participation. They seemed like they were having a great time. They were getting the crowd going. Just absolutely awesome. I'm going to sprinkle some video. At this point, you've probably already seen a little bit. I didn't get a chance to take a lot of it just because my camera was having a hard time getting focus. Once it got dark, it was really hard for the camera to focus. And also, there's a lot of people standing up in front of me that were much taller than I am, and it was just really difficult to take video. So there's just a little bit, but at this point, you've already seen a little bit of the footage of Knocked Loose. But I mean, they were really, really solid. Really, really enjoyed their performance. And again, I would really like to go see like a headlining Knocked Loose performance at some point in the near future, and get like the full breadth of their show. I think that they're a band. I've seen footage of them playing obviously smaller venues. They play equally well in this huge, massive venue that they do in 1,000 cap venue, or maybe a 2,000 cap venue. Just really, really good. I highly recommend them if you have gotten into them. I know a lot of people are kind of new to the band with the new album coming out. I highly suggest, if they're coming near you, go to see them live, because I think you'll have a very fun time. All right, on to the main event, Slipknot. This is the 5th or 6th time I've seen Slipknot. So the first time I saw them was on the Iowa tour. That was in 2001. I saw them again on the Volume 3 tour, and then I took quite a break, and then saw them a handful of times, like in succession over the past few years. I think like I saw them in like 2019, and then maybe it was like 2018, 2019, and like 2021 or something like that. It's somewhere in there. So the last 2 times that I have seen the band, they played the exact same set list and had the exact same stage setup, despite the fact that it was actually 2 separate tours. So that was a little bit disappointing. So to see this was very refreshing. And I know when the tour started last week, I think the show that I went to was maybe only the 3rd or 4th show on the tour. A lot of fans seemed to be disappointed online that they were only playing material from the first album. And to that I say, it's the anniversary of the album tour. What did you expect? Corey Taylor, says after the first couple of songs, hey, you're not going to hear anything after 1999 tonight, and he is 100% correct. They don't play the entire album, and they don't play it in order either, which I thought was kind of interesting. I don't believe they play Diluted live, period. I don't know too much about the particulars of that song, though I do believe it is a very personal lyrical song for Corey Taylor, and I think because of that, he doesn't play it live. I love that song. So for me as a Slipknot fan, my favorite album is the self-titled. I know a lot of people say that Iowa is their best album, but to me, it's the self-titled. I don't think there's ever been a band that sounded like that. You know, there were bands that tried to emulate Slipknot's sound, you know, absolutely, and bands that tried to emulate Slipknot's look, but I have never heard another album that sounds like that first album. It's just its own thing. They've never made an album that sounded like it, and nobody else has come close to making an album that sounds like it. And I like Iowa. Don't get me wrong. I think Iowa is a very fine album, but that one is just not only my favorite Slipknot album, but one of my favorite albums of all time. If gun to my head, might be in my top 5. So to have an entire tour and an entire night dedicated to that, I was very, very happy about it. I was surprised that they did play songs out of order, but you know, hey, you know, that album, if you really think about that album, it's kind of front loaded. Like the majority of the songs that people really think about from that album, Wait and Bleed, Eyeless, Spit It Out, stuff like that, it's kind of in the first 50% of the album. So for them to kind of break it up a little bit, you know, makes sense. They closed with Scissors, which I was kind of surprised, but, you know, certainly didn't complain. The other thing that I did think was odd, but, you know, again, if they're really trying to make it feel like 1999, this makes sense because they weren't doing it in 1999. It's a much more recent creation. Is if you're a fan of the band and have seen them live, you know the whole going down in history thing during Spit It Out, where they extend the riff at the end of Spit It Out and do the whole jump up at the same time bit. It's been a signature of Slipknot shows for quite some time now, but it was not something that they were doing in 1999, so they did not do it this night. I was actually really surprised because when they got to that point in the song, I assumed that they were going to do it because that's what they do. And so I stopped singing along, and he just went right into the next line. And I was like, oh shit, okay, yeah, all right, that's kind of cool, you know, something a little bit different. And again, like I said, this was a little bit shorter Slipknot set. I don't even think it cracked an hour and a half, which was fine with me. You know, we got kind of in and out, and you got a full experience with all these songs, and you know, no filler or anything like that, unless you're not a fan of some of the more album cut songs from that record, I guess. But you know, it was nice to hear stuff like No One live and things like that. They've thrown Purity and Tattered and Torn into the set list, you know, more over the recent years. After, you know, Purity at one point wasn't even on the official release of the album. They had taken it out and re-released the album. The whole thing with that. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really cool experience. If you were a original Slipknot fan, and I'm not saying that as like some gatekeepy, like elitist thing, but just like you fell in love with the band, like at the time when they were breaking out, like this really was a love letter to those fans that were around back then. And for the newer fans, you know, I'm sure they've heard the album, so they're excited to hear some of those songs for the first time. And, you know, so I think it was a really cool thing for them to do. I would not be surprised if they do this again for Iowa, even though that sounds kind of like a cash grabby kind of thing in a couple years. But I definitely wouldn't be surprised. You know, maybe at that point they have another album out. I know that they've been working on material. So I could also see them doing something where they play 5-6 songs from the new album and then like most of Iowa or something, like just to kind of give it that slant during the 25th anniversary year for that, which is only in 2 years because, you know, self-titled came out in 99, Iowa was 01, so it's not that far away from now. I don't know if I necessarily want to see like that nostalgia thing. It's worked for some bands. I know this is going to be like a weird example, but Insane Clown Posse did it, where they did do a full tour for Great Milenko, and they did a full tour for Riddlebox. I think they did a full tour for the Jekyll Brothers. So, I mean, bands can do it. Certainly, you know, it's not unheard of, but at the same time, like, is Insane Clown Posse still producing new music at the clip that you kind of expect Slipknot to do? Like, it kind of depends on the band. I think Insane Clown Posse, and again, this is not a great comparison, but just because it's the example I can think of, I think at this point they're kind of in that nostalgic act bin of artists where, sure, there are bands that maybe have new music coming out, but they are still kind of at this point becoming the modern nostalgia acts, where Slipknot still, they're not there yet. They're still a very active, vibrant, currently producing music act. You know, same way with Metallica. Even though Metallica takes their time between albums, like they're not really a nostalgic act yet, even though they've been around for so long, because they are still producing albums that are good. Like they have good material on them, but are selling well, and you know they're still kind of at the top of their game in a weird way. You know, selling out these massive tours, so they can't really be labeled that yet. So I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily see Slipknot from. I mean, from a business perspective, I'm sure it would make a lot of sense because it's their most well-respected, well-known, well-liked, you know, by the general public, critics, whatever album. But in 2 years, there's a really good, like I said, there's a really good chance they would have fresh new material out where they just don't right now. So this tour kind of makes sense. And with Stone Sour not being active, they're not kind of on that alternating touring schedule like they were for a while there. So who knows? But yeah, I mean, I thought the show was great. Aside from those weird volume issues, I was very happy that I was able to go see it. That album means a lot to me. It was very influential for me. You know, in 1999, that's when I started playing drums. So to have this album come out and Joey Jordison being really tossed in the mainstream and drumming culture, you know, it was a big thing. You know, Lars Ulrich is the reason why I wanted to pick up a pair of sticks. Joey Jordison was really kind of the reason why I wanted to practice and get better and become a member of a band. If you don't really remember at the time and you weren't a drummer, like all the drumming magazines were doing interviews with Joey, and he was on the cover of Modern Drummer and Drum World and all this stuff. And he was really being pushed as like a new innovator in the scene. And he really influenced a whole generation of kids at that time to pick up a pair of sticks and learn how to play drums, myself included. So that album and just everything surrounding it just is really meaningful in my life, not just because I love the music, it helped shaped my taste in music for decades to come, but it also was very influential in me getting actively involved in music. You know, those are the albums around that time. They're the reason why I am still, even though my body is broken down and I can't drum like I used to, I can still produce and make and write and record music. You know, that kind of passion, that seed in my mind to keep being involved with music really was planted by bands like Slipknot and that first album of theirs. So it was a very meaningful experience to go and see this particular tour. But yeah, if you were there, you know, let me know how you thought the show went. You know, I'd love to hear your experiences from it. You know, did you think it was cool that they were doing the all 99 set list? You know, were you a little bit disappointed? You know, I definitely heard some people in the crowd being a little bit disappointed that they weren't going to hear, you know, other material, but what can you do? But that's going to do it for me. I think that pretty much sums up my thoughts. I don't think I forgot anything. Hopefully I didn't. But it's going to be a little while before we have another concert review. I think it's next month in September of this year. I am off to see one of my all-time favorite artists to see live because it is sensory overload. I'm going to see Rob Zombie. I'm very, very excited. But that's going to do it for me. Thanks once again for getting in the pit, and we'll see you again real soon.